Welcome, and thank you all for coming to support A Better Chance and its incredibly important mission to develop well-educated young people of color who can grow into our future leaders. Now, more than ever, their leadership is needed in our nation as we fight for a more just and equal society. My name is David Cox. I am an alumnus of A Better Chance, member of its National Advisory Council, and host of tonight's Creators of Color panel. We're here to support A Better Chance's new initiative, Creating Leaders for a Lifetime. This event was designed in response to the cancellation of the A Better Chance annual awards luncheon. Through its three components, the Alumni Showcase, Virtual Luncheon, and Virtual Auction, Creating Leaders for a Lifetime will provide the critical operating support we need to address the organization's $1 million revenue gap head-on. Tonight is the third session of the Alumni Showcase, and we've brought together some of our community's most prominent creatives to share how they've taken their ideas and passions to the market. Our first panelist is Roxanne Gay, Phillips Exeter Academy, class of 1992. Roxanne, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad to be here with so many great writers and creative people. I'm a writer and editor, professor. So I kind of do a lot of different things. And I write fiction and nonfiction, but not poetry. I'm very, very bad at poetry. Oh, and I also write screenplays.
Excellent. Thank you, Roxanne. Next, we have Tochi Onyebuchi, Cote Rosemary Hall, class of 2005. Class of 2005. Hi, Tochi. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tochi Onyebuchi, also a writer, also very bad at poetry. I do fiction, nonfiction, also getting into screenplays and TV plays, and have a wee bit of a legal background, particularly in civil rights law.
Excellent. And finally, we have Krishanda Lee Perez of Miss Porter's School, class of 1994. Krishanda, if you say that you're bad at poetry, I mean, but it's okay because I'm bad at poetry too.
I'm going to plead the fifth about poetry.
Fair.
I have tried. I'll leave it at that. Krishanda Lee Perez, you just gave my age away a little bit. That's all good. I'm really delighted to be here and inspired by so much of the work on the panel today. I'm a writer as well. I write nonfiction and fiction, and also screenplays. My most noted work are works of fiction, of a novel, Become as Girls We Leave as Women, which is a coming of age story about all kinds of girls from all over the place who happen to attend world famous boarding school in New England. Thanks, A Better Chance.
Thank you, Krishanda. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize our sponsors. Thank you to Bridgewater Associates, the Costas Family Foundation, Deloitte, DuPont, Henry R. Kravis, Lori and Peter Allen Atkins, Ronald R. and Mary H. Pressman, Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meager, and Flom, LLP, Stanley Black and Decker, and Theo and Dana Killian for making this event possible and for securing a better chance for the next generation. Okay, we got that out of the way, so let's get started. And I'd like to start with you, Roxanne. Many have read your stories and comics that explore themes of feminism, body image, and of course, what it's like to be a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you why you chose writing as your outlet as opposed to others.
I think I've always been a writer. I've been writing since I was 4 years old. Of course, at 4 years old, I was writing the kinds of things that you would expect a 4-year-old to write. I wasn't a prodigy. But I just loved it. It was always this way for me to tell stories and to enjoy my imagination. And that meant a lot to me to have that space to do so. And as I thought about the kinds of things I wanted to write as an adult, writing just felt like the perfect venue more than music or theater, even though I love theater. It just was the right thing, because when I'm writing, I feel like I'm always able to say exactly what I want to say, how I want to say it. And there is just no other realm in my life where I have that kind of confidence or clarity.
Absolutely. That confidence and clarity is absolutely key to being able to express ourselves fully and honestly and openly. Absolutely understand. Thank you. Um, Krishanda, what do you use as motivation for your subject matter? Is it personal experience? Is it societal events? And how does that ignite your imagination?
Well, I love to observe people, and I was always told that interested is interesting. So I've always been interested in people and their experiences, and I would often, make up stories about people, just people watching if I was in the park when I was a kid and things like that. And that would inspire me to write some really, you know, uh, far out there tales in elementary school and whatnot. But when it came to my own personal stories and laying out my feelings, the journals were the biggest inspiration for me. The whole old school lock and key that you hope that nobody gets in. That made me feel like, wow, I can actually tell my truth. And I didn't know to call it my truth back then, but that's such a common phrase that we use today, telling and speaking your truth. And then I, became really interested in helping other people do the same. So I've been helping people to, writing their memoirs and just, coming from a place. I love to really come from angles about normal, quote unquote, ordinary people that are extraordinary, delving into areas of people's lives that the average, person wouldn't think to ask. And really helping people to realize that you don't have to be, something that's seemingly on the outside extraordinary to really be a huge contributor to our the fabric of where we are. So I just am inspired by just people, everyday people.
Absolutely. And I love that you play that game about, seeing people and trying to figure out what they, who they are. My wife and I play that joke as well. We'll sit in the park and we'll be like, okay, who's a tourist? Who's not? Who's
Uh-huh.
a New Yorker? Who isn't? And then you have to
Exactly.
give reasons why or why not.
Totally.
Always fun. Always fun. Definitely. Thank you. So Tucci, in thinking
Tochi.
of, sorry, Tochi. In thinking about your success as a writer to date, what do you think is the key to connecting with readers? And when you finish writing a book or a piece, how do you feel? Do you feel like it's a winner? Do you feel like it's going to do exactly what you want it to do?
So with regards to that and sort of audience interaction, audience perception, one of the ways that I'm able to sort of keep most grounded and also sort of keep my sanity is to understand that ultimately I'm writing for myself. I write the books that I want to read, but also the books that like I want to write. And I found that the more specific you get in your storytelling, the more, through the inherent, you know, empathetical magic of storytelling, the more universal the story seems, or the more universally the story can be read. And so as long as I am producing work that I'm proud of, work that I love, work that it is an honor to put my name on, that to me is ultimately satisfying. Because like if it doesn't matter after that if there's a bad review that comes out or like somebody drags me on Twitter or like whatever, right? As long as I'm content and happy with and proud of the work that I did, like the rest sort of follows from there.
Absolutely, because that's actually a part of telling your truth. You're putting yourself out there, and I mean, you see what happens. But as long as you're proud of it, everything else is just gravy. I definitely get that.
Can I add to
Sure,
that?
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I just started working with this organization, another friend of mine from school, and it's called Self-Evident Media. And, our job is to, through animation, help to bring these stories that a lot of young people and people our age don't know about. So there's stories like about Benjamin Banneker, there's stories about 1919, the summer, that pivotal year, It was one story that I just finished about Sojourner Truth that really blew me over. You know, I had heard the speech "Ain't I a Woman" for
Hmm.
years, and I learned just, not too far in the recent past that that was not the speech she gave. You know, she was actually someone who was raised in the Low Dutch country of county of in upstate New York. She spoke very good English, and for our standards, and she didn't even speak in the drawl that we, often phrase when we hit through "Ain't I a Woman." She would never even said, "Ain't I a woman?" And doing some research, I learned that that version of her speech was rewritten by someone, a white woman, who made that speech more popular. And it's a fact. And I was just like, holy cow. Um, it was really exciting to be able to dispel that. But at the same time, for me as a writer, it just gave my writing even more purpose as a Black woman, and making sure that our stories are able to be told in the most authentic way, and nobody else gets to tell those stories. So often we have found as Black women, I'm sure Professor Gay would speak eloquently to this as well. Everyone writes our stories. We're always being told, our stories are being told through someone else's lens. And so I didn't even think about the purpose I could serve as a writer that happened to be a Black woman. But as I'm learning more, the older I become, I feel like I'm learning more than I learned when I was a kid. And that has influenced a lot of my writing as well.
Yeah,
Well, thank you.
uh,
Go
I
for it.
say Krishanda talks about something that is very important to me. It becomes more important the older I get. So many people try to tell our stories, and when we're talking about the importance of storytelling, a lot of times people will say that I want to give voice to the voiceless, which is actually a really paternalistic and bizarre thing that people say to feel better about themselves. When in fact, nobody is voiceless. Everyone has a voice. It's a question of whether or not they have the means of amplifying their voice. And so one of the things that has been most important to me in my career, especially as I get toward the middle of my career, um, is being able to create opportunities, especially for Black women, women of color, queer women, to be able to use their voices without any interference from gatekeepers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're definitely going to get into some of the more recent media that have come out that we've been privy to. But I'm going to start back with you, Roxanne. Um, so, speaking to our audience, even though our audience may not be filled with writers, we all face some kind of block, some type of creative block or writer's block at one point or another. Uh, what methods do you use to overcome this that you don't mind sharing with us?
Well, when I figure that out, I'll let you know.
Absolutely.
Writer's block is one of those things I deal with. I think all writers deal with it, and I in some ways I actually write through it. I've been dealing with writer's block for the past 3 or 4 years now, and it's been really hard because normally writing comes easy to me, and I don't mean that like in a bragging way. It's just I'm not a tormented writer. I enjoy it. It brings me pleasure, and I tend to write very fast. I'm ready to actually do the work. But it hasn't been that way for the past 4 years, probably because I've been touring nonstop since 2014. And, the more success you achieve as a writer, the less time you have to write. And I've really struggled with finding, I write every day, but it's not fun, or more than that, it's not comfortable. And so I find that I have to just sort of grind through it. But when I'm really blocked, I try to just go do something that's creative, but not writing, whether it's going to a play, going to a museum to look at art. I find that art really helps me because I look at things like I saw this art exhibit at a museum in Indianapolis once, and it was just like these strings stretched from the wall to the floor. And I was just like, I mean, I can do that. And the thing is, sure, we all think that, but I didn't. And so someone had the audacity to do that and to call it art. And enough people believed them that they got it in the museum. And so I'll start to go down that road. And I love the way art makes me think and makes me question creativity and what I understand, and it expands my understanding of creativity, I tend to be able to go back to the page after an experience like that and find something new to write, because I think, just think of the string stretching from the wall to the floor. So I can do that, but with words.
Nice, nice. I love that. I feel like I've heard
Well
that.
said.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard that before as well, kind of write through it, push through it.
Mhm.
I deal with my own issues with writer's block as well, confidence issues, imposter syndrome,
Oh, for
you
sure.
know, that comes up big time, not just in writing, but kind of in anything and everything that we do, because, we want to be great, we want to be awesome, we want to be the best, but there are times when we feel like we're being told we're not.
Mm.
Please excuse me for a second. Traffic, web videos, such is life, right?
Actually, can I jump on something that you were just saying, David? That reminds me of actually a tweet. I spend way too much time on Twitter than is healthy for me.
Mm.
But it reminds me of a tweet that I saw. I think it might have been yesterday, even. And it was something along the lines of, if you don't think at least 80% of your writing sucks, you're not a writer, or something like that. And I'm sure the original poster meant to be encouraging and meant to signal to, aspiring writers, people that are in it now, that it's okay to like not feel like you're, producing your best work all the time. But for me, especially because so much so much gatekeeping happens that keeps people from marginalized communities, keeps people from color from entering a lot of these industries, from entering publishing in particular. And so much of that is the imposter syndrome, is the like, I don't know if this book is good enough. I don't know if it's being, rejected because, it's not at the standard it needs to be at, or because the editor can't relate to the Black characters. And I pushed back against that because for me, writing is a source of joy. I like legit love doing it. Oftentimes, if I'm blocked on a scene or a particular project, it's because I'm scared of something inherent in it. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen in the scene as much as I need to know before I jump into it. Maybe I just need to think on it more. Maybe I just need to play some video games and like loosen myself up. But I want to, particularly for audience members that are creatives or wanting to be creatives, like, you can like your work. And also too, if something ends up on the cutting room floor, that doesn't mean it's bad. It means maybe it's just not working in this particular project and what have you. So like, I think that's another sort of switch mentally that once I made, it became much easier for me to do this writing thing, because like I felt like an imposter pretending like I didn't like my writing, if that makes any sense, because I loved my writing. Like, I'm good. Like, and I think that's what, a lot of writers, particularly writers of color, are good. I mean, we have to be,
Yeah.
right? We have to be. We're good. And like, we should talk that talk.
We really should. And it's so interesting because there seems to be this valorization of self-deprecation, and like, you're supposed to not admit that you're talented at writing. And people often think when you say, I'm good at this, that you are saying I'm the only one who is good at this, or I'm the best at this, when in fact, no, we're acknowledging, especially I think as Black writers, how hard we have to work and how good we have to be to achieve what we've achieved. Like, if we were white, like, we would be in the Hall of Fame. And it's frustrating to be able to not have space for that kind of discourse and just be like, I know what I'm doing here. Like, this is my thing.
I agree. May I add to that? Let me tell you, I believed that you have to hate your work, or you had to hate, that phrase of 80% of your work before you felt confident. I mean, I literally was following this kind of like recipe to what it should take to be considered good. And then I doubled it because I'm Black. I probably added another 10% because I'm a woman. So having all those on top of me, when it came down for me to write and to even publish my book, my novel itself is self-published. It's from a small publishing company, but by and large, it's considered self-published. And I remember just running through a litany of agents and, the query letters and just the constant no, 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 no. And then I was also told by a mentor that, you have to have as many rejections to cover a desk with wallpaper, something like that in order for you to feel that you've arrived. So if you haven't been rejected 30 times, then you haven't even gotten your your feet wet. So I went through all of that, but then I started having these issues with the story. Now, my story is about a handful of girls who attend a private school in New England. Because I'm being true to the demographics, majority of them are white. Because I'm being true to the demographics, only one girl who's a protagonist is, a black girl, and then you've got your one Hispanic, but everybody else for the most part is white. I cannot tell you how many agents who are not black who wanted me to take my one black character. I have one shot with this story to have a redeeming black girl who makes me feel like myself, who can inspire other black girls who are reading it, who are going through, and then also for those who aren't of color can learn about black girls as well. And I cannot tell you how I was told it won't be believable because she had a mother and father who loved her, who worked really hard to pay tuition. And they thought that she should have the story, as we all know what that story should be, going to a private school and being black. Somebody had to be incarcerated. There had to be some sort of fundamental deficit. It just couldn't be that she come from this, solidly middle class family. And that is when I decided I'm going to take my show on the road. And when I learned getting in front of audiences and like Roxanne, literally putting myself on tour for pretty much 2 years, the amount of people who resonated with the story, who were like, oh my God, I want to pass this on. But had I listened to the gatekeepers, I would have stayed on the shelf. So I had to push through that sort of stereotype of what, should I have sold out my girl, my one shot for a black girl? Should I have made her a little more edgy? Should I have made her a little bit tougher? Did she need to have an attitude problem a little bit to make her more believable to the masses? Or could she just be a girl who wanted to go and get a good education like everybody else? And I chose to keep her as she was. And I've been very pleased and I feel very proud that I was strong enough to go through that. But I would say that there was a time in my earlier part of my writing where I wouldn't have felt as confident.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's very important that, we fight to make sure that we're not a monolith. We're all different kinds of people. We have all different kinds of views. We've grown up in every way like everybody else. We all have our own opinions. We all have our own lives to share. Those lives are important. Those lives matter. We should be able to share them. Absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback off of that with the next question I was going to have Krishanda and Tochi share, which was, with all the challenges we're facing right now in our country, how does who you are and where you are from shape your writing? And when you're writing, do you think about using your voice and platform to create awareness, to educate, reform, action? You can definitely, further elaborate if you'd like.
Tochi, you go first. I just talked.
It's actually something that I've been thinking about a lot. I mean, it's something that occupies a lot of my mental real estate generally, but particularly given the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 months. I even, wrote an essay about it on Tor.com about, the duty of the Black writer during periods of American unrest, right? Like in many ways, we're sort of looked at and depended upon to be these sort of translators of the Black experience, and in particular of Black trauma, right? We're supposed to be able to articulate it for the, upper class, upper middle class, white reading public. And we're expected to do this, particularly given the way that the attention economy is structured right now. We're expected to do this literally as soon as the next hashtag appears. And like, if I weren't a human being, if I were a robot, maybe it would be easier for me to sort of jump into that duty. But, I watch somebody who looks like me, who looks like my dad, who looks like my uncle, you know, essentially have the life crushed out of them over the course of 9 minutes on camera. And I have to process that. And in addition to process that, field requests on what this means for the country when I'm going through my own very personal sort of, traumatic aftermath. And so, like, I think for me, one of the things that I come back to is this sort of aspect of self-care, and also sort of cultivating or trying to cultivate a sort of healthy selfishness. Some days I literally just want to turn on my Xbox and play. Like, I don't want to I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to talk to any non-Black people, particularly about Black stuff. Like, I just literally, I want to hop on Twitch and I want to play some video games. And I think that's an important habit and dynamic to cultivate, because I think another aspect of it too is we're expected to articulate our humanity. And my whole thing is like, if you didn't already believe in my humanity, like, I don't think you're my audience. Like, I'm not writing for you. People there, there's a portion of Riot Baby that takes place in Rikers. And a lot of people talked about how the incarcerated were humanized in that section for them. How, like, oh, I didn't know it was like this. And it was very important for me to show people behind bars in this situation where it's not just omnipresent violence all the time. Like, people there are concerned with gardening, people there do book clubs. Like, there's so much life and humanity that happens in these places. And people were like, oh, Tochi, like, you really humanized the incarcerated for me. Well, what were they before you read my book? Like, how did you think of the incarcerated before you read? Like, I'm happy you put money in my pocket buying my book, but like, the purpose of my writing that book and writing that portion of the book wasn't for you to suddenly see Black and brown incarcerated people as human. They're already human to me. They should already be human to you. And I mean, maybe the next book that you encounter, the next story you encounter, whether on TV or film, that contains incarcerated people, maybe they will have already been made human. Maybe they will already be human in your mind to you. So I think, going back to the genesis of the question, I want to think more about me. And I think a lot of Black creatives, particularly when sort of hounded to speak to these non-Black audiences about Black trauma, I think it's an important lesson to care about yourself and to do what you can to, sort of keep your sanity amidst all of this, because we quite literally have skin in the game.
Yeah, and I think that too, when you're thinking about what happened to George Floyd, or anyone who is being brutalized by law enforcement, or just average people on the street with no regard to our humanity, as a Black person, you almost can't help but not connect. I would say that everyone on this panel, has come to some level of accomplishment in their lives. They're, on some level, they're, not in the environment that's going to sort of put them directly in harm's way that way. But, we never know. All you have to do is walk across the street these days. You could just be breathing while Black and something can happen to you. And then they, oftentimes they shoot first and ask questions later. But for me, I started off really humbly in my life. I'm a, product of teen pregnancy. There's a score that has to do with trauma, and it's called the ACE score. And I check, a number of those boxes. But I was intervened by a family member, and that's what shifted my life. So there's a part of me that will always be that little girl in Milwaukee. So whenever I see or hear, it doesn't matter how high or how accomplished or how many dinners I've attended or what's the shoe count, I will always be connected. And I think as Black people, even if you were raised, like my kids, who they didn't have to see that, which I'm very grateful that, we have gotten better this generation. But because it's still in my family, they are just a stone's throw. So they still are going to connect to it. It's almost impossible that, it's one of the beauties of being of color or being Black. I mean, I speaking specifically about Black people, that we generally don't run. We become successful, We still have Uncle Junebug or Ray Ray who's in this space, and we still claim him as our own. And those people, those characters often fuel the richness in our characters. It often brings authenticity to the work that we bring to the table. And it brings us, not a shred of humility, a poignant piece of humility that makes a lot of works that have to do with, like, from Langston Hughes to Maya Angelou, that work is supreme, but it's not coming from the space of not connecting. It's coming from a space of absolute connection. So I always want to be in a space where I don't forget who that little girl is in Milwaukee. I never want to be in a place where I become so accomplished where I can't recognize myself and another little girl who was also really trying hard to get educated, but for whatever reason is not able to at the time. And so I'm all in my work, and which is why I typically fight for it. And, a family member sent me this article with Ava DuVernay years ago. This is before I decided to go, solo on my mission of putting out my own work. And it was an article where she spoke about, you no longer have to wait for people to tell you it's okay to put your work out in the world. You can just do it. I mean, there's all these platforms to do it. And it was so freeing for me to read that. I go, I'm gonna open a website and I'm gonna have a blog, or I'm just gonna start writing essays. And before you know it, you find so many people who can relate to you. And that just continues to bring confidence to you as a writer. Although, as we all know, it can be painstakingly lonely, but what comes out of it is something that really can bring people together. So it's such an honor and a gift to be in the position of a scribe, quote unquote.
I have to add to that I feel like immediately in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I think the one time that I actually kind of felt not calm, but like a little relief was when somebody posted online, "Your Black friends don't want to talk right now."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're now highlighting, you need to understand how difficult it is to be on Zoom for work talking about any and everything while this is going on in the back of your head. I appreciate the fact that I feel like we're now telling people we need a break. You will hear from us when we're ready. You'll hear from you'll hear from our emotions. You'll hear what we have to say once we process this. And I think that's something that even I avoided initially when, with previous tragedies that have happened, just out there on Facebook, just going after it, just yelling at people. And I don't know if it was the severity of the situation or the fact that we couldn't escape it because we were all in quarantine, but it was a lot. And it felt really nice that somebody finally said, you know what? Take all the moments you need. Take several seats and just figure it out. Process as you can. And, no pressure on how fast it has to be. And in fact, let me check in on you and make sure you're okay. You don't even have to answer me back. Stuff like that I really appreciated and I think was really important in this time. And I don't know, you guys might tell me, maybe in that time, maybe you found a voice for something to write about, found a voice to speak to anything, that event or anything in general.
I get asked to write about current events quite a lot, and I understand where that impulse comes from. But fortunately, the deeper I've gotten into my career, the more I've been able to say, I might, but I'm not ready yet. Because there's this cycle that's relentless, and it was created, I think, in large part by 24-hour news. This idea that there is a content machine that needs to be fed, and it doesn't matter what you put in, just that you put something in it. And when I look at the issues that we're talking about these days, with everything that is at stake with the presidency, with everything that we're protesting, with, you know, George Floyd, I think broke a lot of us because it was just so long. And I had stopped watching videos of police murdering Black people because you know, when you've seen 10, you get the gist of the next 15. But for whatever reason, I ended up watching the George Floyd video, and I just thought, my God, when is this gonna end? And I kept looking, and I was like, oh my God, it's only been 2 minutes. It's only been 5 minutes. And then it was 8 minutes, 45 seconds. And you know, it took me a long time to be able to write something about it because, first of all, I had to feel just grief and rage and all of that coupled with the disgrace that is the presidency, and the way this country is responding to this man. Like, I was not optimistic that he was going to lose, but now I think he's actually going to get blown out. But there's still going to be about 45% of this country that's going to vote for him. And so I'm trying to also grapple with the fact, like, who are those 45% who are like, the economy is completely trashed and he's a selfish, petty tyrant who's also stupid. But I think I'll go with this guy. And so I just have been trying to take the time because I don't know how to not just vomit rage on the page. Like, if I have something to say, I need it to be productive and meaningful. And so I'm fortunately finally finding words, but I certainly needed the time. And I think a lot of us have needed time. And frankly, I don't know that there's enough time when it comes to some of these issues that we're talking about. And, you know, I was thinking about what Krishanda said. The reality is that a lot of Black writers, I don't think people realize, like, we're literally one generation away from absolute poverty. You know, my parents are Haitian immigrants. And there's a trauma that comes with that. Like, when you know, not only are you one generation from poverty, but you still have family in poverty. And you're the person that's like lifting 100 people along with you. And that also creates an additional, I don't want to say burden, but responsibility in terms of writing, because there's a great deal at stake, not only for you, but for, you know, direct family members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to continue with you, Roxanne, if you don't mind. We're going to transition a little bit. I know that everybody here, as they've, you know, talked about writing, you know, screenplays and so on. So I wanted to talk about the industry. And Roxanne, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Hollywood's attempts at representation in media, specifically on screen?
On screen?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge progress when progress has been made. And especially in the past 3 or 4 years, I think we've started to see some real progress, and it's encouraging. But what we're seeing is on the screen, and we're not seeing a lot of change behind the camera, and we're not seeing any change when it comes to executives embedded in the organizations to make these decisions. I've actually been fortunate. I've had Black executives on every project. It's a miracle.
Wow.
But even with the Black executives, it hasn't been enough to get anything made because they're surrounded by white executives. And I don't think people understand just what we're working against in terms of the biases in the system. Like, when I was shopping in Untamed State, which is my first novel to sell, and we did end up selling it, I sat in a meeting at a major studio, and the guy said, "Why should I care about Black women?" And I was just like, oh, I mean, did you think you were thinking that thought? Like, he really was comfortable. And the people around him were like nodding, like he had asked a profound question. And so when I see the progress, I'm really encouraged by Misha Green with Lovecraft Country, Michaela Cole with I May Destroy You, and seeing people who have like specific points of view and getting some of that like Wes Anderson freedom. I think like now we're doing something. Of course, Ava DuVernay, but we can still name us in the industry. And like, if I sat here and thought about it, I could probably name like all 15 people who are currently in development or like doing great things. Oh, that's more than 15, but you know what I mean. So I'm encouraged, but it's like it seems like for every step forward, there are several steps back, and it's this constant uphill battle. And it's happening while people are expecting us to sort of be grateful for the scraps and be grateful for what little change that we're seeing. And even the change that we're seeing, there are so many things that are at play, like colorism. Like when you look at all of the creators who are making projects right now and who are getting deals, most of us are reasonably light skinned. And that means something. It's incredibly terrible. Like Michaela Cole is an outlier in terms of who gets attention from Hollywood. So I hope that there's a space to be able to talk about these things and to talk about the progress that has been made while also acknowledging just how far we have to go and what specifically needs to be done to bridge that distance.
Thank you. That was tremendous. I appreciate that. Appreciate your candor and your honesty. Um, to Krishanda, what are your thoughts about opportunities for Black filmmakers and producers in this new Hollywood world?
Well, I think it's, in a nutshell, for Black people, it's totally Robert McKee. It's like show don't tell.
Mm.
And you really have to like, prove yourself. There's a story, it's a magical realism and science fiction that I've been writing with a partner for years. And it's called The Forever Tree. There's a short film to it, and there's this another bigger version of it. But when we were shopping that film, no one would believe a Black girl on a quest. It's very much like Indiana Jones, but imagine a 20-something-year-old Black girl going through all this stuff and just doing all these stunts and everything. It's really fascinating. And we're weaving magical realism in it. We're weaving in historical fantasy. And I had seen all those types of films before, but they were never with people who look like me. So we literally had to raise a budget to create the short film and then put it through film festivals to prove that this storyline could be possible. And from it, there was all this, really great press that was the result. Lots of people, industry people, I mean, heralded it. What a fascinating tale. What a fresh take. But I can recall just saying those things that we had to show by raising funds to do on our own, and nobody believed me. Whereas, I don't want to name any names, but I think about the stories that I hear of people who are, young writers or youngish writers who have concepts for stories and for film and television shows, and they literally just have to, write a little bit on a piece of paper, give a general idea of what they're thinking of, and just like that, they have a writer's room, and you're just like, wow, someone's going to take a shot on, someone's going to take a chance on your idea that you wrote, like, 500 words. Whereas for us, there's all these hoops and this that we have to go through, but then when it's shown, then they say, oh wow, that's really interesting. But so it isn't as if the opportunities don't come, but still there's all this extra work that people of color, Black people I am speaking of, because I am one, have to go through to get to that space. So there was a time where even when we did the work, people would still shut the door. So I suppose we are making progress, to Roxanne's point. Yet I await the day when we will be able to be recognized and acknowledged for just the great concept that somebody decides they want to develop, just the concept.
Yeah.
Or, hey, let's think about that. Let's actually invest some actual time. And the line of why should I care about a Black woman? I just think, I immediately run over a litany of films where there's a white woman as a protagonist, and the message is you should care about white women. I can give you, like, off the top of my head, it's like this film and this film, this one, where it's like from rom-coms to historical treasures. But for Black women, we still have still have that work to do. But I am obviously still in the game and will continue to be in the game, because what perhaps is wanted by some is to be frustrated to the point where you just exit and that's not even an option because, as Maya said, I come as one. I don't mean to be sappy here, but we know the rest. So I got ancestors on my side. I'm not going to bow out that easily.
You bring up an important point, though, that doesn't also, I mean, there's so many things that don't get talked about enough, but like the expectation and the amount of work that we have to do to get, and Toshi was also talking about this earlier, like the amount we have to do to get into the room and have a seat to even maybe be considered versus like the napkin story. And people think you're exaggerating, but like that's literally kind of how Girls Got Made. And
I was trying not to name names, Roxanne.
I'll name names. And
no, we're spilling tea on this panel.
The thing is, I'm not jealous. I'm angry.
Because no, because it's a great show, but it's just that why can't we have similar outcomes? You know, like I would love to just hear a similar outcome because I'm all about women empowerment. So, you know, we come as girls. I'm all of us. You know, first and foremost, every single woman, you know, I feel like we already have our work to do. At the same time, there's still that extra barrier when you are a brown girl.
For sure. Like I'm taking a show out right now and I don't need to do anything. Like I know how to pitch this show. I've been working on it for a year. I'm good. And meanwhile, the studio exec is like, no, we need you to come up with a pitch document. So I have an 18-page single-space document. And it's just like, this is a show Bible. Any white man would take this and get a full series order. And meanwhile, you want me to do this just to get into development. It's infuriating, but you're also right that like, if we get so angry that we leave, they win. And then we don't get to make these great shows that center Black lives and different kinds of Black lives. And so it's just one of those, like, this is the system and we have to try and change it. But man, they make it hard.
It's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Right, absolutely.
But every time we see one get through, it inspires us to keep it moving. So, you know, we have to celebrate and keep it going. There is absolutely no sort of wins that you will receive by, you know, having a bitter attitude if you are feeling wronged. You can have those feelings because I believe the spectrum is real, but you have to put those to the side and then get back up and say, you know what, this is worth it. And, you know, you keep pushing long enough. I really just believe in the power of persistence and the power of alignment. I just really believe that I didn't make it this far. Somebody didn't believe in me when I was a kid in Milwaukee, whether it be a family member or whatever. You know, I didn't make the strides of, no, you can't have this. Okay, I'm going to try this route. And then that be successful for me. You know, I'm just going to keep on going. There is a line where Will Smith, he's so awesome when he says this. He was interviewed by Tavis Smiley. And he says, you know, I don't profess to be the best actor. I don't profess to be the, you know, the best or what have you. He says, but you will not outwork me. You will not outwork me. He says, if we get on the treadmill, you're on one and I'm on the other, I'm either going to die or you're going to get off.
And he owned a day of the year.
Huh?
He owned a day of the year, like independent. Like there was a period in the 90s where there was this, like I think it was Independence Day actually, where every year that was like Will Smith Day. Like he had a movie coming out that year, and
you're right.
Yeah,
success is the best revenge. Listen, success is the best revenge. So I just put on my Will Smith face and hey, let's get on the treadmill.
Love it. Okay, well, I was going to ask this question to Tochi, but you know we've already talked about it, so let's talk about it. So shows like Watchmen, Lovecraft Country, Atlanta, and then movies like Get Out and the upcoming Candyman film. What do you think is the connection between science fiction, horror, Black stories, and the Black experience? We can start with Tochi and then we can expand from there.
Oh man, I could go on for a whole other hour
answering that question. It's fascinating.
It really is. I do think a common thread in all of those projects, you know, particularly, you know, you look at the thematic preoccupations of a show like Watchmen. Lovecraft Country and Get Out, there's this sort of, and I think you see it too in a lot of science fiction and fantasy literature, particularly with N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. And shout out to N.K. Jemisin, just got announced as a Genius Grant recipient earlier today. So shouts to her. But there's this decolonization of genre happening. And these are the gorgeous fruits of the effort of what happens when you have the children and grandchildren of empire writing speculative fiction. Science fiction is inherently colonialist. Like all these first contact stories that started the genre are about white heroes going to alien planets and killing the aliens, like literally committing genocide, and they're the heroes, right? And now you're seeing so many of these stories told from the perspective of what would have been considered the alien, right? You have these stories from perspectives such that you can look at a show like Lovecraft Country and really ask yourself the question: who are the real monsters? The things with three eyes, or the cops? And it could be both, and right, and that I think is an incredible and incredibly necessary perspective that Black creators can bring to genre. I like the terrain is so rich for us. And I think it's another thing too, that science fiction and fantasy, speculative fiction in general, you can operate as metaphor and reality simultaneously. So, you can look at, the whole dying earth subgenre of science fiction as, climate change parables. And that is one of the reasons why I think Get Out works as well as it does, is that, it's almost like it's metaphor and reality at the same time, because there are so many things that you could watch in Get Out and be like, oh, that's my life, but also for real, that's my life. If you're a Black dude who ever dated a white girl in the Northeast, I'm sure there were many, many, many flashbacks that you were having during that, meeting the family, going to the house. I feel particularly in the environment that I was lucky enough to be in by virtue of being a scholar with a better chance. I met many similarly situated, Black males who I could talk about these situations with and what have you. And, you see a movie like Get Out and you're like, oh, wow, how did Jordan Peele literally get into my head and dig out my life? But also you have, you can have a scene Allison Williams' character literally going through online pages and looking at basketball players trying to find the next specimen for her experiments and whatnot. And you can see, you're like, oh wow, that's so many different things. That's, professional sports. That's so many different things that are happening that are a reality right now. When you have the perspective that Black people are bringing to these genre conventions, it's just, the storytelling is so incredibly rich.
Does anybody else have anything to add?
I think
I would like to say that just with regard to storytelling too, it's like when someone says, "Oh, you're a Black writer," and I'm like, no crap. I'm totally. You can look at me and tell this, but I'm not coming to the table as a Black writer per se, because there are nuances in my experiences if I'm writing about something that's nonfiction that may hearken to the culture. But much of my writing has to do with empathy and just trying to get more people to recognize themes. And thematically, as human beings, we experience the spectrum of emotion. So I was giving this talk in your neck of the woods, Roxanne, with a private school. I think it was at Castilleja there, and telling them something along the lines of, you can't say that you don't relate to somebody if you're trapped in an elevator with them for an hour and then somebody's parched, and before you know it, you're sharing the same, this is pre-COVID, obviously, you're sharing the same water bottle because you're both thirsty. And then you both learn that even if she's wearing a hijab, you both are mothers, you both love your kids. And so all those nuances are just cool details, but the themes of your lives are the same. And what I've been trying to inspire with the writing that I've been doing over the years, which I don't think that I did it intentionally, Though I am intentional with my writing, I didn't think that they would have like a common thread. But when I put all the works together, I realized that it had a lot to do with empathy and just trying to get people to look at stories, specifically if they're Black, and humanize them. This is a story about a Black person, but guess what? You have the same experiences. Oftentimes, when you see a show that's Black and the cast, the ensemble cast is Black, you often will have more viewers that are of color because the assumption is people can't relate to that. Why would a bunch of white girls watch Girlfriends? How are they going to connect? Everybody on the show looks like they're Black, but the same show that has to do with all white girls called Sex in the City, all of my friends love that show. And we're Black, many of us are Black. I cannot wait for the day when we break through that as Black writers, where we can see our stories as experiences and themes. And thematically, people can connect to them and celebrate those nuances that are different. The whole hey girl, which is very Black, you know what I mean? Or, y'all, which is a very Southern thing versus, you all or something like that. Those are all nuances. But by and large, the themes are what are supposed to connect us all. And through works like Get Out, which is why I connect on a different level to New England schools and whatnot. I didn't have that exact experience, but it was the themes that drew me in. And so through the work of Roxanne's, through the work of Tochi's, et cetera, and David, that's what I feel like, even if we're not trying, as writers who put our heart and soul into the work, that's kind of what part of our intention is, to get people to look at us and look at the stories as human, first and foremost.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering these questions. I really appreciate it. And now we're going to transition over to Q&A. Okay. So coming from our audience has been watching us. First question is, we've been talking about it both outside of this conversation and in this conversation, a lot about, pain. It's part of what's happening with us right now. It's been part of us since the beginning. But what the audience really wants to hear about is joy. So what are some ways that you use writing for joy? Joyful things that you write about? What are those things? And we could even talk about it in media as well, like, joyful things that we see when we see us on screen, anything like that.
I mean, I think we should just do a rendition of Rob Bass's Joy and Pain, because I now I have that song in my head. Thank you. I think it's incredibly important to talk about joy. I still find genuine pleasure in the act of writing. I love it. It's my favorite thing to do. I kind of feel like it's the only thing I'm good at. And I love being able to bring complexity to our stories, because it isn't just pain, but the pain is there. And I think it's important to acknowledge that pain, because especially as Black women, we are encouraged to be impervious and strong. And what people think strength is never admitting that we're human, that we have feelings, that we feel pain. So part of joy is acknowledging pain and having the space to talk about what that pain looks like and feels like. But also there's joy in being able to write about happiness and what happiness can look like, and love and what love can feel like. It's something I really love, writing about love. And I didn't for a very long time because boundaries. And, if you don't save something for yourself, like it can be really problematic. And also, just because I'm a writer and somewhat public figure does not mean my wife is, wants to come along for that ride. She does. But, there's something so joyful about being able to do that and to talk about like the ways in which my life has changed over the years. So I just, there's joy in all of it, from the practice, the opportunities that have come my way. Like recently had the opportunity to edit an anthology or put together a selected works of Audre Lorde. And I never would have imagined that I would be able to do a project like that. And to be able to do that and spend a year reading her work and being reminded of what an incredible scholar she was. I have a cuckoo clock, sorry. It was just such a joy. And like, there's also just joy in the opportunities.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about it just now, and they're the only stories that I think I've written that have not sort of in any way, shape, or form involved Black pain or white supremacy have all been commissioned by Black people. Like, now that I think about it, there was this anthology, Black Enough, that was edited by Ibi Zoboi. She was nominated for the National Book Awards some years back for her novel American Street, and it's a series of stories by Black young adult authors, and it's all about the sort of variegated aspect of, the young Black experience in America. You have stories about, Black girls in the Pacific Northwest going hiking, and Black kids at the pool, and it's all about all the different ways you can be a Black kid. And I wrote this story about this young, Nigerian American son of immigrants who's a debate champion who gets introduced to heavy metal. And it was so much fun to write. I had such a blast writing this story, and literally every time that I think about this story, because I was that kid. When I was in middle school, when I was in high school, I loved, System of a Down, Slipknot, like all these bands that, like, according to stereotypes, I wasn't supposed to be listening to. Right?
Slipknot. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I was such a huge metalhead, and it was a thing that I loved so much. And to have the opportunity to write about a thing that I loved, that was particularly meaningful. There's another book that was announced earlier today, I think. Black Boy Joy. I think that's the title of the proposed anthology, edited by Kwame Mbalia, who, he's a middle grade author of Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. I think the sequel is Tristan Strong Destroys the World. Incredible writer. And he basically gathered together all these Black male authors to write stories about Black joy. And I have a story upcoming in that about, a boy who loves skating and loves skateboarding. And like that, like the things that bring me joy, not just to do, but also to watch other people doing, and like being able to tap back into those aspects of my life, my adolescence and whatnot, that brought me such incredible joy. I think it's so wonderful. And it's not lost on me that the people that I've written these stories for, the people that have asked for and paid me for these stories, are all Black.
Wow.
So there's this hunger for it.
Yeah.
We're looking for it too. And we should be able to sell that as well. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. So again, to everybody, how can we encourage the youth of today to embrace reading a book when there's so many social media distractions, and then also, do you have any advice that you'd like to share for any young ABC scholars as they navigate their own personal journeys? Because it's very interesting, like Tochi and I were both, class of 2005, but Tochi went to private school, right? And I went to a community school program. So even just in that, I lived in a house with other ABC boys and went to the local highly rated public high school. That experience. I mean, even back then when I was a kid, I was like, this needs to be a reality show.
Yes.
Just like all the stuff that we were doing in that house alone. I was like, this is a reality show right here. Obviously, it can't be, but just the stories and different situations and scenarios we got into, all kind of crazy. But so we have our year, in common, but we have these different experiences. So, and that was a bad tangent. Again, back to it. What would you say to encourage, kids to read? And I guess e-readers work too.
Well, I would say that I mean, I can't speak for Gen X. I mean, I can speak for Gen X because that's what I am. I can't speak for Gen Z. And then there's so many who attest to not reading and they still can be prolific in what they write and things like that. Um, I don't know how that is entirely real or something. I mean, that maybe just call me old school, but I just believe that the more things that you read, especially things that are at somewhat length, the more inspired you will be, the broader your vocabulary becomes, the more ways you learn to say the same thing. And, I don't know if you're able to really strengthen that muscle of writing without taking in, a litany of information, litany of stories, learning about people. You mentioned earlier what gives you joy. I love to write about love. Like it's like a huge passion of mine and not my own. I mean, other people's. I'm just like the fly on the wall. Um, but in order for me to have gotten to that space, I think it's because I'm a big love story reader. Like I love love stories. And I've become really fascinated with love stories that speak to Black people in particular, because that's something that we don't really read about a lot or see a lot on television screen. And it could just be a story about two people in love, but just the fact that they're brown is a mirroring image for young people to see that. Um, I can't really say that you can sort of omit the reading piece and consider yourself a writer, or to say that you want to be a great writer and you have not read the works of Baldwin, you have not read the works of Hooks, you have not read the works of Gay. You have to take this energy in again to just help strengthen your own muscles. So if you claim that you want to write, there's work to be done, and you find that even if it seems like it's painstaking in the beginning, the more you get involved in the story, you will become addicted. I mean, you can't help it, especially if it's written well. You won't be able to help yourself. So I just urge somebody to just open a book, one that you've heard of that's really good, and you'd be surprised at how fast you end it, just because the stories are just that enriching.
Yeah, I would say to get people to read, you have to give them access to books. It really is that simple. A lot of times people talk about we have to get people to read, like, and these things are not going to just magically happen. And so you have to put books in front of young people. The National Book Foundation does quite a lot of work in this realm. Dolly Parton, of all people, does quite a lot of work in this realm. I think, in fact, she is like the #1 distributor of books in the country. Like she's giving like on a level of hundreds of thousands. It's really quite remarkable what she's doing and has done, I think, for the entirety of her career. And so I think it's all about access and, writing good books that young people are going to want to read. We're not competing with social media. It's really, that's not what we're competing with. We're competing with the idea that there's nothing interesting in books and that there's nothing like innovative. But if we put a bunch of Riot Babies in front of kids, they're going to read it. I mean, that book is dope. It's just like you can read it from the first page. It's got magic in it. It's got real issues that kids are dealing with. It's got, fun, and it's got this tight sibling relationship. It's so intensely warm, but also just weird. And so like, just giving them the opportunity by creating ways for them to get at the books. I mean, libraries are a thing, but there are other ways of doing that, and just not making it seem like medicine. So often we make reading seem like this huge obligation and that you're like a better person if you read, which you are. But I think if we just make opportunities for young people to read books, and we don't put a lot of pressure on it, and we don't put a lot of value judgment on it, and let children and young people come to literature however they want, and let them know that whether you're reading Baldwin, which is also essential, or you're reading Krishanda's work or mine or Toshi's work or any of the contemporaries, it's okay if that's where you're starting, if you're not starting with the Baldwin or the Alice Walker or the Toni Morrison. But hopefully you'll get there. Even if you don't, though, reading is reading. I don't care what you read. And I always tell my students this. If James Patterson is your jam, okay, but we're going to talk about why there's better literature out there. And so I just try to meet people where they're at. And I think if we do that a little bit more, I think we will see more people reading. And I also think that better books, I think it's our responsibility to get people reading by writing things that they might want to read.
Yeah, no, I think the access point is so important. I mean, it's like voting, right? Like you can say vote, 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 but until the Shelby County decision gets reversed and all these voter registration and voter ID laws and all these structural barriers that have been put in place to prevent people from voting are broken down, it's going to be difficult and immensely inconvenient and nigh impossible for a ton of people to vote who would otherwise want to vote. And I think with regards to access to books, it's so important because, I think there's only so much power in the writer's hands. I think a lot of this is the onus of publishing houses, publicity and marketing departments. If they're organizing a tour for somebody like me, they'll have all these places that they'll send me to, all these festivals and whatnot. These are places that a lot of kids in underserved communities don't have access to. They don't necessarily have people who have the resource to drive them however many miles to whatever the venue of this book festival is. They don't necessarily go to the high school that's able to sponsor a ton of writers to come through for their festival or for their event or what have you. And it's almost like pulling teeth to get your publisher to send you to a high school in the Bronx. To just talk to kids. And like there's literally the next whatever, whether it's Baldwin, Walker, or even like next Jemison, the next whatever, could be sitting in that class, and no writer has been put in front of them to let them know that they can be a writer, and that is a possibility for them. And so I think as much as we talk about the things that storytellers can do, I think it's also imperative that we bring this conversation to the people with entire departments that are geared towards getting books out in front of people. I think that's such a huge, huge, huge thing. I think the second thing that I want to say, the second and final thing on this point that I want to say is to point to a sort of democratization of reading inspiration or the stories that you imbibe. Like you can see, I have this 6-volume hardcover reissue of Akira, sitting on my shelf. It's one of my prized possessions. That's a manga. That's a graphic novel. My head's kind of blocking, but right next to it, it's a string of graphic novels from Marvel. And Riot Baby, you can read Riot Baby and see the X-Men influences. Like you can see the anime influences there. And, I grew up as part of the Toonami generation, Gundam Wing, Outlaw Star, like these were the stories that I was imbibing. And yes, I was reading a ton, but also a lot of how I learned how to tell story, I learned from watching anime. And all you have to do is hop on TikTok for like 2 seconds and you'll see there's this entire genius pool of Black content creators who are the biggest weebs on the planet. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Like we love anime and we grok it. Like we understand it. We can tell all these different, we can note all these different story conventions in it and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can analyze it. We can dissect it. We really understand it and can apply it to, other forms of media. And I think if young storytellers can hear that is also like legitimate homework in terms of learning how to tell a story, I think that can go a long way towards encouraging future scribblers. Like if your inspiration for telling stories is Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's valid. Like that's absolutely valid. Also, that is a damn well told story.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to thank all three of you so very much for taking the time to speak with me this evening and speak to our audience. I just love the fact that we can talk about writing, we can talk about creativity, we can talk about the importance of love and joy, but also taking a break and, taking care of yourself. We can talk about television, we can talk about, mangas, all that stuff. All of that encompasses writing. And it's so important for all of us to know that we can tell our own stories. And that's the most important part. Tell your story. And by telling it specifically, you kind of tell it universally. Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Krishanda. Thank you, Tochi, for spending time with me this evening. And have a good night.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
you. Great to meet you all as well.
You too.
Wonderful to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.